I'm not a liar. Not a conspiracy theorist. Not a man known to exaggerate. No one's listening. I'm throwing this message in a bottle online, hoping someone relevant picks it up. If you know me, you know. You have my number. Call me. Let me explain. I'll start from the beginning. I'm a South Dakota boy. Came from a small community near the bend of the river by Crow Creek. Us East River folk live by a different tempo. We don't get a lot of big headlines, and we keep our dreams close enough to see them from our bedroom window. I wanted to be a cop like my dad. I followed in his footsteps, got my badge, and now I'm a cop too. Before this whole shitstorm started, I'd been doing this job for 4 years. I was no stranger to death or disease, but it's from places you expect. Some guy overdosing outside a fast food joint, a diabetic running a stop sign into oncoming traffic. We see gruesome stuff. You can't avoid that. It comes with the job. But it was never intentional, you know? It was always a consequence of bad choices or random happenstances. Or plain bad luck. But one day, we got a call about something I'd been dreading. A driver called about spotting something off the road west of Wessington. We didn't get a lot of details, but me and my partner were the closest to check it out. Apparently, they'd found a head. A human head. Out there, it's all flat. No hills. Just the occasional tree blocking the horizon. We could see this guy parked by the side of the road long before we got there. There was a couple other people there too. An old man with a bloodhound, 2 teenage boys taking pictures with their phones, and a man in overalls that reminded me of a walking blueberry with a sunflower patch on his chest. That was the driver, the guy who made the call. Russell and I parked and got out. Russell's my partner. Had been for about 9 months at that point. We worked well together, but we had no contact outside of work. It was better that way. The few times we'd got personal, we figured out we were nothing alike. We had vastly different opinions and experiences. West of the river kind of folks, you know. We go up to this blueberry guy. He tilts his cap and points at the end of the fence with the butt of a cigarette. "Right there," he says. "Shit's right there." He was trying to play it off as something casual, but I could tell he was mortified. There were 3 cigarettes scattered around his feet, and at least 2 of them weren't even half finished. He was shaking bad enough to drop them. The old guy with the bloodhound had to hold his dog back. Not that it was angry or anything, but it seemed desperate to sniff the thing. And from where I was standing, that's what it looked like. A thing. Not a head, not a person. Just this pale blotch of skin lined up against a fence post. "I was stopping to talk to Chris when I saw it," the driver continued. "That's Chris." The old man raised a hand and snapped at his dog, who finally calmed down. "I stepped back and called you guys. Barely looked. Not a peep." Russell asked the mandatory questions, establishing a timeline, asking about witnesses, what he was doing, all that stuff. Meanwhile, I asked the teenagers to step back and explained to the old man that we had to keep the area clear. I was the first one to step up close and take a good look. Someone had to confirm that it was a human head. And it was. It was fresh. A young woman, maybe 20 to 25 years old, mouth half open as if letting out a long sigh, eyes closed. Without touching anything, I took some pictures. It's important to be able to show a crime scene the way you found it. You never know when the weather's going to take a turn. I made a couple observations. She didn't have any makeup on, and there was not a large pool of blood or gore. The head was sort of propped up against the fence, making me think someone left it there intentionally. This was not an accident. No way. It dawned on me that I was witnessing what might be my first murder scene. Well, not a murder scene. A murder display, if anything. We called in the cavalry. As I mentioned, things like this don't happen where I grew up. Accidents, yes. But this was no accident. Couldn't be. We got a whole bunch of cars out there in less than an hour. We sectioned off a part of the farmlands to check for further body parts. We got the cadaver dogs. We called to prep for an autopsy. And we had crime scene investigators on site by late afternoon. I'd never seen that kind of mobilization. Now, I'm sure they wanted to bring in some expert from Sioux Falls, but time was a factor. We needed an early call on whether this death was the result of an accident, animal, or tool. Yes, it all pointed to a murder, but we couldn't know for sure. That wasn't our job. Before anything, we needed an initial statement. We had a coroner and a medical examiner ready. The problem was, these were local guys, and they weren't prepared. Not in the least. Me and Russell were sent along to get them up to speed as a sort of go-between. We were the first to get there, after all. We got the pictures and the initial statements. Also, we knew these people. That'd make things easier. Russell and I got there just before dinner time. The medical examiner had gotten there about 10 minutes ahead of us, and the coroner was already getting work done. The medical examiner was a lady named Corrine. Early 40s, mother of 4, no-nonsense kind of woman, with a bad but honest temper. The coroner's name was Daly. Man ought to have retired by then, but he was still going at it. Almost 70 years old, but as sharp as ever. When we stepped in, he was already turning the head over, and making observations about the wound. "Daly?" Russell said as we entered. "How are you holding up?" Just dandy," Daly said, making a note. "I'm more worried about our friend here." Corrine pushed us aside and made her way to the examiner's table. Russell got a pretty good shove and rolled his eyes at her. "Since you're still looking, I take it you haven't come to a conclusion?" Corrine sighed. "What's the verdict?" "It's easier to explain what it's not at this point," Daly said. "The wounds are about halfway patterned, halfway something else. But it depends on the time they were inflicted." "So, what's the TOD? Are we talking days or weeks?" "I haven't got the slightest clue." That made her pause. There were several inconsistencies that Daly noted. For example, several of the usual markers that we see in corpses just weren't there. There were no flies or maggots, and many shows of decomposition had either not manifested at all, or manifested in an order that didn't make sense. For example, the inner lining of the mouth showed signs of advanced decay around the soft tissue, but there were no signs of bacteria or strong, active smells. Daly couldn't make sense of it. Russell and I stood back and watched them work. We knew Daly had a habit of not answering his emails or checking his phone, so it was better to have some boots on the ground to keep tabs on their progress. We were all going to be on call for most of the night anyway, so we figured we'd settle in for the long haul. I took a dinner break while Russell stayed behind. He'd brought leftovers that he forgot to eat for lunch. I got an hour to clear my head and fill my stomach while they kept working. I checked in with the guys still out in the field. They hadn't found anything else. No witnesses, no footprints, no track marks, no wheels, not a thing. They were checking traffic cameras going in and out of the area, but the distances required and the amount of cars passing through made the potential numbers go up in the hundreds. I could tell it was a dead end. Hell, I could tell that just by the tone of their voice. By the time I got back, Daly and Corrine were arguing. They were listing things on a whiteboard, going through them one by one and crossing things off. You could tell who'd written what. Daly had this old-fashioned cursive, while Corrine kept it simple and blocky. The smell of chemicals tickled the ranch-sprinkled taste buds on the back of my tongue, making me wish I was back outside. Russell gave me a pat on the shoulder and took a break, leaving me alone with the arguing professionals. Corrine was in the middle of a monologue, pointing at one thing at a time on the whiteboard. Not a hacksaw, not a chainsaw, not a... what'd you say? Piano wire? Not a piano wire, Daly agreed. Not a knife, not an axe. And we got nothing certain, Corrine continued. Not a fragment, no nothing. Daly turned to me. You got any ideas? You see anything out there? Anything? Not a thing, I shrugged. A witness statement in the folder. This is shit, Corrine spat, flipping the folder over. Not a single thing we can use. You don't think it was wildlife? I asked. Wolves? Bears? We have to find some kind of baseline before we start eliminating things that ain't, Corrine explained. We can't just start listing things that's not. Well, that's better than standing here saying nothing, Daly argued. Hold on. He flipped the whiteboard over, uncorked his pen, and started at the top. It's not a wolf, he said. What else? They went at it for hours. Not a wolf, not a bear, not a coyote, not a bobcat. Just a long list of things to exclude. They checked for fur, claw marks, teeth marks, anything. All the while, Russell and I went up and down the stairs, calling the chief to let him know there was nothing to report. By 8 p.m., we were running in circles. We called it a night. Corrine packed up first. Then Russell and I got off the clock. Russell headed home instantly, but I noticed Daly sticking around a little longer. I pretended to look for my keys as I kept an eye on him. He was still talking, but not to me. We're missing something, he mumbled. We're missing something big. Like what? I asked. He looked up at me, snapping out of whatever thought was running through his head. I'm just making conversation. Pay me no mind. All right. You get to lock up? Daly waved me off with a smile, and I didn't think much else of it. The next morning, we got a call about feds wanting to join in on the action. I tried to get a hold of Daly, telling him to come in a little early, but the man couldn't be reached by email or text. He was coming in whenever, and that was that. Corrine, on the other hand, was already there by the time Russell and I pulled into the parking lot. She was leaning against a streetlight, tapping a pen against a notebook. Not a big machine, she mumbled. Not a small machine. Not a tool. Not a saw. Morning, Corrine. Russell yawned. Trying to get some work done before the feds get here? She ignored us. We'd gotten the spare keys to open. Daly got the other pair. Corrine wasn't usually the one we called for these kinds of things. Then again, we'd never had this kind of thing. Not really. The moment Russell clicked the lock open, Corrine shoved her way past him, this time with even more force. It was enough to make Russell go, "Hey," but she had no visible reaction. She kept mulling over whatever list she'd made on her notebook. She was eager to get back to it. We only had about an hour or so before reinforcements would come knocking on the door. Corrine wasn't wasting any time. She ran down the stairs, put on the bare minimum equipment, and rushed to pull the slabs out. We barely had the time to keep up with her, like she was racing against the clock. But when she pulled the slab out, there was a whole other problem. The head was gone. Russell stood there, mouth agape. He snapped out of it the moment Corrine turned to us, her eyes sunken and red. Something was off. She'd always been a bit short and snippy with us, but this was something else. I don't think Russell saw it, but I could tell she was up to something. She looked from him to me, and then at the door. "Not a little girl," she mumbled. "Not an old lady. Not a teenager." "You all right there?" Russell asked. "You sleep okay?" I could tell she wasn't listening. There was something about the white of her eye that bugged me. A sort of micro twitch, like a nervous dog. When she suddenly burst into a sprint, I was ready. Russell wasn't. I stepped in front of her and she ran straight into me. She knocked herself to the ground, landing face first on the hard floor. I could hear the air pass from her lungs in a huff. I got a pretty nasty bump landing flat on my back, but nothing was broken. A bad bruise, but I got lucky. Russell was on her back within seconds, putting her in handcuffs. "Not a snake bite," Corrine mumbled. "Not a hound. Not a house cat. Not a gunshot." "What the hell?" Russell gasped. "What's wrong with you?" "Not a thing wrong. Not a question answered. Not a long way to go." "Corrine!" Russell yelled. "You hear me?" I was already calling for another squad car. Time was of the essence. We had a missing head, and Daly wasn't around. I prayed to God he just overslept, but I had this sinking feeling in my gut that he hadn't. There was something about the way he'd lingered the other night that made me think he might have done something he shouldn't. Another car was sent to check on Daly, but he wasn't at his apartment. Another car went to check his office, but there was no one there either. We ended up combing through whatever contacts we thought might be useful. Russell and I had our coffees, making mental lists out loud. "His ex-wife?" I said. "I know he's got one of those. I don't think he made it to Florida overnight. His car's still in the driveway. So, not an ex-wife," I said. "Not an ex-wife," Russell agreed. "Not a chance. Not a..." I turned to look at him as he tapered off. He stared at the steering wheel, coffee hanging limp in his hands. His eyes were glassed over, and I could see a bubble of spit pooling in the corner of his mouth. He wasn't blinking. "Russell?" He blinked, dropping his coffee straight into his lap. It wasn't that hot, but he was up and about within less than a second, cursing like a sailor. He kicked the cup down the street like it owed him money, and got back in the car, wiping the seat of his pants with a blanket from the glove box. "You okay?" "I'm not about to get sick. Not now." "You sure? You seem out of it. You really think Daly stole that damn head?" Russell said, changing the subject. "You think he'd do that?" "He could have. I mean, it's possible. What's the odds of them both disappearing without him being involved?" Not a snowball's chance in hell. Exactly. Not a chance. I gave Russell another look. He was clearly thinking about something, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I tapped him on the shoulder and handed him my coffee. I think you need this more than I do. I'll take the wheel for a bit. We spent most of the early day driving around town, asking questions. We had a couple of vague leads, but it's like we were spinning tires, stuck in the mud. Russell was getting frustrated, so the chief asked us to do something else for a bit. They were busy dealing with the feds anyway, and they had 4 different squad cars out looking for Daly. We were sent to check on a roadside diner, old folks kind of place. It had been closed all day, and the waitress working the lunch shift was getting worried. The owner wasn't answering their phone, and there had been no notice ahead of time. There was just a note in the window saying closed. It wasn't a high priority call, but it gave us something to do. That is, until I noticed something curious. We went to check up on the place before we headed to the owner's registered address for a house call. But when I got closer to the sign, I noticed it was written in a beautiful cursive. I elbowed Russell and pointed. "You see that?" He nodded, moving in to get a closer look. "Not a common thing around here," Russell said. "Owner's got arthritis." "You don't think he wrote that?" No, he coughed. "Now that I think about it, I think I've seen Daly around here before." "You have? When?" Not along." Russell trailed off, falling silent. I gave him a couple seconds. This time, I wasn't going to snap him out of it. I wanted to see what was going on. He stood there for a full minute. I counted. It was a full minute. Then he almost toppled over, tipping forward like a fallen tree. That's when I rushed to catch him. If I hadn't, he'd have gotten a face full of gravel. He immediately went on the defensive, straightening his back out. "I'm okay," he insisted. "I'm okay. You gotta talk to me. I'm okay. Whatever. I'm okay. Stop saying that. You keep saying that and you zone out." "Saying what?" I blinked. I didn't want to say it. There was something dangerous in it. Like turning a key to a door you didn't want to open. I shook it out of my head and headed for the car. Before I got halfway, Russell was going around the back. He wasn't about to wait. He was heading inside, with or without me. I had to stop what I was doing to catch up with him. I called out to him, but he was heading for the back door. Before I got to him, he'd cracked a window and shoved the door open. He was rushing inside with the same urgency that Corrine had, except I wasn't there to tackle him. Last thing I saw before he rounded the corner was him pulling out his gun. I called out for backup as I ran after him. I stopped dead in my tracks a couple steps inside the kitchen. The owner was on the floor, face down in a pool of blood. You could smell death on him. Russell had stepped over him, heading straight for the front of the diner. This wasn't like him. Russell wasn't a hothead, not a thrill seeker. If anything, he was the controlled one. "Russell," I called out. "Gotta step back. Backup's on the way." There was no answer. Instead, he rushed straight for the door and stopped. I followed him, rounding the corner. The blinds were all shut, casting the whole serving area in a gray shade. A couple streaks of sunlight made their way through the shutters, lighting up the white spaces with spots of red. Daly had been busy. Without a whiteboard, he'd been writing on the furniture with whatever pen was closest. Turns out, that pen was blood. The first few sentences seemed familiar. Not a cougar, not a lion, not a panther, not a gator. More animals. But the further in you got, the text got smaller, more concentrated, and the sentences grew stranger. Not a lot, not a little, not a lord, not a queen. Then, at the far end, there was something written on a table. Russell was already there, picking something up from it. As I got closer, I saw the text, while trying to keep an eye on my partner. The text was cleaner, underlined. Not a person. Not a person. Russell nodded. Yeah, that makes sense. What's that you're holding? I asked. What are you doing? He dropped his handgun to the floor and cradled something between his hands. As I got closer, I saw what it was. The bottom jaw of the missing head, torn loose. Not a person, Russell repeated. Not a threat. You ought to put that down. We got people coming any second. He looked up at me, elated. This immense sense of relief spreading across his face. It's not a person, he repeated. It's okay. Not a person. Not a corpse. What's not a corpse? He held up the jaw, looking me in the eye, and without looking away, he put it up to his lips and bit off a mouthful. It didn't make the sound I thought it would. Instead, there was a soft and mushy kind of noise, like someone biting a jelly-filled marshmallow. He barely chewed for a second before he got another chunk. She? He said, mouth full. It's fine. Not a person. I kept shaking my head, backing away. I didn't even notice I pulled my gun. He held out the flesh to me, looking like I'd said something hurtful. Try it, he smiled. Try a little. No way, I said. Not a... I had to stop myself. I had to physically stop myself. Thinking about this sentence made my head spiral into a pattern of repetition over and over again. Like an allergic reaction in the back of my mind. I slapped my hands over my mouth, smacking my front teeth with the metal of the gun. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't shoot Russell, but I couldn't stay. I turned away. I hadn't noticed the bathroom door opening. The one in the back, near the grill. And I hadn't noticed Daly waddling out of it. Turns out, he'd had a meal of his own. He'd eaten most of the head. Hair was still hanging out the side of his mouth. His glasses were clinging to the tip of his nose. A single good shake from falling on the floor. In the dark, his hands looked black rather than bloody, but you could tell from the smell. I ran straight into him, almost knocking him over. He fumbled his steps a little, leaned back against the wall, and braced himself. It's okay, Daly burped. It's not a person. Not a corpse, Russell added. Not a soul. could hear myself finishing the sentence. I was just a syllable or two away. I wanted to say it was not a person, too. Not a problem. Not a... Instead, I pushed past Daly. I rushed forward, leaping over the dead body, and threw myself out the back door. I got a good 10, 15 feet past the door before I looked back. Daly and Russell were both standing by the door, looking at me. They weren't chasing me off or trying to talk me down. They just stood there, mumbling the same pattern, the same rhythm. They couldn't figure out what the hell this thing was. So, they were just listing things it wasn't. Not of this, not of that. Then, I heard something. A dragging sound. And I realized they weren't looking at me. They were looking at something behind me. Something cold and mucus-covered wrapped around my eyes like wet seaweed. I screamed, but that only served to open my mouth. Something cold got pushed in past my tongue, tickling my tonsils, and I swallowed. I choked as something bitter and meaty swirled down my gullet. It felt like someone had thrown a sack of bricks off a tall bridge, landing hard in the bottom of my stomach. I fell forward, gasping for air and scraping my knees. I was dry heaving to get that thing out of me. My eyes were covered in grease, and all I could see was this figure. It emerged from behind me, moving past me. I barely saw the shape of it, but it had something like a big arm coming out of its side. It looked like a big corn cob, but instead of kernels, there were pieces. There was the shape of a foot, a hand, long hair from a scalp. As it moved past me, Daly and Russell silently joined it. Before they disappeared down the northern field, I heard something snap and tumble to the ground. I got to my feet, stumbling. I made it to the bathroom. I shoved fingers down my throat, but no matter what I did, nothing came of it. Something was stuck in the pit of my stomach, and by the time backup arrived, I was sobbing on my knees, bent over a bloody toilet seat. I was screaming into the porcelain, begging for whatever was inside of me to leave. But it didn't. They had to drag me out by the arms. I didn't get any of it out. Not a piece. Not a little piece. Not a single little piece. They didn't find Daly or Russell. I ended up with a 2-night stay at the hospital. Apparently something similar happened to Corrine. She'd had a breakdown, and they were still trying to figure out the problem. Some signs pointed to a fungal infection, but they couldn't find the cause. The doctor determined that it was not a virus, not a bacterial infection, not a misfolded prion. They had to put her on an IV, as they couldn't get her to shut her mouth long enough to eat. They were still trying to figure me out when I got sent home. They said I wasn't as far gone. Paid leave. 3 weeks. 3 weeks turned to 6, as the test results came back inconclusive over and over again. At one point, they thought I had some kind of contagion, but they couldn't say for sure. Someone mentioned narcotics, and it just turned into a long list of negative tests. I switched doctors 3 times, as they kept tripping over their own diagnoses. One of them ended up taking their own sick leave after a while. I've been trying to figure a way out of this. I sit up at night, staring at the wall, drawing on my cheap wallpaper with a black pen. I want to help them. I want to figure this out. I write what I know to be true over and over. It's not a threat. Not a person. Not a human. Not a corpse. I had to give myself a reason to write again. I've been trying to resist it for so long. It's like whistling a song that you know you can't stop humming. If you start, it'll be on your mind all day. But I'll just do it. I'll do it until I get it out of my system. I don't care if it takes days or weeks or months. I'll figure it out. I'll get it out. And once it's gone, I'll be back here to figure this out. Not a day, not a week, not a month, not a year, not a threat, not a person, not a killer, not a beast, not a thing, not a.
Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.